Good morning, and thank you for coming. During my remarks, someone may wonder how I became class president, let alone class analyst. The explanation is simple. In the course of the cocktail party preceding our 45th reunion's class banquet, a dinner cruise upon the romantically named New York State Barge Canal, John Oates, then class president, and Hal Higby, then and now class gift chair, said they needed to discuss an important matter. We moved to the stern of the vessel from where we could see the canal receding to the west as the boat headed east, and John asked if I would accept appointment as class president through our 50th reunion. I was dumbfounded. I had never aspired to a position of leadership of our class. I had come to the reunion with my spouse simply to visit the college and to meet former classmates. The occasion also provided an excuse to buy some new clothes, a sport coat, and a couple of dress shirts. I said I needed to give this some thought. John rejoined our classmates. Hal stayed behind. He looked at me. He looked at the canal. Again, he looked at me, and then at the canal. He cleared his throat and he said, "You know, Chris, that's a nice blazer you have on. Be a shame if anything happened to it." And so here we are. Because so much happened during our time on the Hill, preparing this letter has been a challenge. Thanks to coverage in The Spectator, memories shared by classmates, and in one instance, the daughter of classmate Kenyon Fields, 2 telephone conversations and several email exchanges with former college president John Wesley Chandler, and the invaluable assistance of the college's archivist Catherine Collett, I've been able to put together a narrative inclusive of a number of our experiences. To begin, 243 Pea Green freshmen matriculated at Hamilton in September 1964, of which 176 would graduate 4 years later. So large was the class that it exceeded Dunham's capacity. 11 resided in South Dorm. This was later somewhat inelegantly explained by the director of admissions, Sidney Bennett. We ended up with more than we wanted because more than we anticipated accepted our offers. Happily, he did not go so far as to identify the unwanteds. Not surprisingly, the majority came from New York State, 60%. New Jersey, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and Ohio combined added another 18%. The rest came in 1s, 2s, and 3s from elsewhere in the United States, along with 8 other countries: Denmark, Ethiopia, Finland, Gambia, Iran, Malawi, Scotland, and Somalia. Whiteness predominated. Kenyon Field was the only African American in our class, and regrettably, he had to withdraw at the end of his first year due to a serious medical condition. We were nominally Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish. We were straight, and we were gay. We appeared to be fairly bright, our average SAT scores being 630 verbal and 658 math. The Spectator later reported that we smoked less and drank more than the class of 1960. Make of that what you will. Fall semester was devoted to acclimatizing to the world of Hamilton, to Saga Food Service's incomparable cuisine, to the routines of dorm life that in my case included discovering that one of my roommates talked in his sleep, not only in English, but at times in French. I will say that his accent was much better when he was fully conscious. A Jewish classmate was startled but nonetheless acquiesced when a Gentile asked if he could feel his head for the devil's horns that Jewish males purportedly possessed, according to an old anti-Semitic trope with which that student had grown up. Momentous was the adjustment to Hamilton's academic standards. Unforgettable were the shocked expressions on the faces of classmates returning from taking the first hour exam in History 11 in the latter half of September. I was part of the second cohort to take that test. Their shock was fully justified. Those first exams were a turning point. As my advisor Austin Briggs later observed, college does not really begin until you get your first exams back. Few had any illusions about what to expect thereafter. One high point of the fall was the spectacular fail by the pep band, of which I was a member, at a football game early in the season, resulting from the trumpet player forgetting his part, that is, the melody to the national anthem. Ever resourceful, the band proceeded to lead the crowd in song. Max Weber, the athletic director, was not amused. Thereafter, the United States Marine Band performed the Star-Spangled Banner on a scratchy record played over the PA system. Also memorable was the come-from-behind upset of Wesleyan by our football team on October the 31st, when, having come back from a 21-6 deficit at the end of the third quarter, the Continentals won thanks to the only field goal of his college career, kicked by Larry Pritchard, class of '66, after time had run out. Tragedy struck our class over Thanksgiving weekend, when an automobile accident took the life of our classmate Stuart Kanoff and severely injured two others, John Farrar and Skip Conover. This was in the days before seatbelts. Back then, the fall semester extended into January. With the end of final exams and receipt of our grades, most sensed they could succeed academically. But 5 classmates did not return to campus. We fully engaged with the social life of the college in the spring semester after 205 pledged one or another of the fraternities. Now we came to know like-minded upperclassmen and enjoy the amenities of fraternity life, such as occasional beer kegs. However, a particular house defined occasional. We had a place to socialize with our dates. Talking to older fraternity brothers, we learned more about the faculty and the courses they taught, with whom to study and whom to avoid. Thoughts about possible majors became less abstract now that we could interact with those already immersed in a subject that might be or might become of interest to us. The curriculum of our day had 2 major components. First, classes to satisfy 6 attainments essential to a liberal arts education. Second, courses required for, as the college catalog put it, a particular concentration. Characteristic of the times, the curriculum was Eurocentric, a point I'll return to shortly. The college aspired to create sound bodies even as it sought to create sound minds. We had to swim a certain distance, run a certain distance, and thereafter develop a minimum proficiency in 2 individual sports, one indoor, the other outdoor, that we could, in theory, carry over into the real world. A very sensible approach to PE. We were required to attend chapel services on Sunday evenings, a cause of significant dissatisfaction. But early that November, we learned that a committee of the Board of Trustees was reviewing this policy. 5 months later, it announced that Sunday chapel attendance would no longer be required starting in the fall of 1966. By the end of sophomore year, we had satisfied most of the distribution requirements and had declared our majors, the coursework of which constituted the academic agenda of our final 2 years. During this period, we began to identify the most inspiring faculty members: Professors Adler, Barrett, Blackwood, Caravano, Ellis, Endy, Graves, Kinnell, Lee, Long, Mattingly, Moreau, Nesbitt, Potter, Richardson, Rockwell, Werdemer, and Yorty, among others, were instructors that my classmates and I recalled with gratitude for their engagement with their subjects and with us. Not only were we the last class in an all-male academic community, we were the last to complete this curriculum. At the beginning of his tenure as president of the college, John Chandler initiated a review of the academic program with which he and leading members of the board were dissatisfied. Among the subsequent reforms was the elimination of distribution requirements. Thereafter, breadth of study would result from close interactions between students and their advisors. That new curriculum was also intended to encourage an expanded worldview, reflecting President Chandler's criticism of, quote, too much emphasis on Western civilization resulting in educational parochialism, unquote. His characterization of the curriculum I previously described as Eurocentric, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Many of us wanted as normal a social life at Hamilton as possible, despite its isolation. In fact, given the distance from women's colleges, at times it imposed a seemingly monastic existence against which students pushed back. The principal social events were the 3 house party weekends that took place in October, January, and April, during which women in considerable numbers came to campus, typically arriving Friday afternoon and departing Sunday. For some, the run-up to these weekends was emotionally fraught, the result, as one classmate put it, of the anxiety of making sure I wasn't dateless for a house party weekend. This was but a small manifestation of the larger challenge posed by Hamilton's location. How to meet someone with whom you would like to spend a couple of days? A blind date? In no more than 5 minutes, you knew whether that was going to work out well, and usually not. Mixers? We had one early freshman year with the women of Wells College, very awkward. We and they were herded into a large room in the basement of Dunham and were expected to pair off for the afternoon and evening within a matter of minutes. For many, a recipe for disappointment. But miracles could happen, and some did connect with contemporaries. But what to do when that person attended a college 2, 3, or more hours away? Find a Hamilton student who had a friend at the same school, had a car, and was departing the Hill at a time that would work for you, taking into account the fact that many had Saturday morning classes. Your friends faced comparable obstacles when planning to come to the Hill. Those weekends were loaded with expectations. For between 36 and 48 hours, you had a whole different social experience from the day-to-day life on the Hill. The popular music of our time gave voice to the attendant emotions. Imagine rolling to Wells, or Skidmore, or Elmira, or elsewhere, in hopes of meeting someone with whom you might feel a bond. How did it feel when you did connect with someone? No. Sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself there. Here we go.
I was alone, I took a ride, I didn't know what I would find there. On the road, but maybe I could see another kind of mind there. Ooh, and I suddenly see you. Ooh, did I tell you I need you every single day of my life?
After that came feelings. After that came the feelings of anticipation that you will see her again on another weekend. Feelings gathering strength as that weekend approached.
It won't be long yet. It won't be long yet. It won't be long yet till I belong to you. Every night when everybody has fun, here am I sitting all on my own. It won't be long yet. It won't be long yet. It won't be long yet till I belong to you.
But Sunday always came, along with the inevitable separation.
Close your eyes and I'll kiss you. Tomorrow I'll miss you. Remember, I'll always be true. And then while I'm away, I'll ride home every day, and I'll send all my loving to you.
Sustaining such relationships through the intervening weeks was not always easy. Communication was either by letters that could take 2 or 3 days to arrive, or by payphone.
Imagine what you do. I think about your day and night. It's only right. You think about the girl you love and hold her tight. So happy together. If I should call you up, invest a dime.
Call you up, invest a dime? Hell. A dime got you the long-distance operator. Quarters were required. And what if there had been a misunderstanding that you were trying to sort out and you ran out of change? Where was Skype when we needed it? And what if your friend's hometown was hundreds of miles from yours? How to cope with the separation that summer inevitably brought?
I'll be alone each and every night. While you're away, don't forget to write. Bye-bye, so long, farewell. Bye-bye, so long. See you in September. See you when the summer's through. Here we are, saying goodbye at the station. Summer vacation is taking you away.
A lot of time was spent working out the logistics required to be with one another, time better spent on one's studies. Beyond the vital intellectual contributions to the academic community that Kirkland College would provide, I believe it also began to create a more conventional and emotionally mature social environment on the Hill. But what was the place of our gay classmates in all this? One can only imagine the options for a house party weekend. Leave campus until it was over, pass as straight, carry on as if nothing was out of the ordinary save for the fact that you did not have a date. Memories of the gay experiences of members of the class of 1968 confirm those options, along with those of clandestine liaisons with other gay students. New York Times columnist Frank Bruni recently summarized the world that gay men had to negotiate. Back then, gay stereotypes went unchallenged, gay jokes drew hearty laughter, and exponentially more Americans were closeted than out, unquote. Far more so than is true today, to come out could mean being ostracized by peers and heaven knows what by parents. Those house party weekends were among the occasions when some of the most important popular musicians of the time came to campus. Odetta, Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells, Mary Wells, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, Mongo Santamaria, Tito Puente, and Richie Havens. Who didn't come? Otis Redding. Scheduled to play for a fall house party weekend in 1967, canceled after losing his voice a week or so beforehand. From the world of jazz came trumpeter Art Farmer, pianist and songwriter Mose Allison, Al Cohn and Zoot Sims tenor saxophonists, Toshiko Akiyoshi and Charlie Mariano, pianist and saxophonist respectively, and pianist-composer Horace Silver, at the time promoting what would become an iconic recording of mid-1960s jazz, A Song for My Father. On other occasions, performers of classical music came as well, among them pianist Charles Rosen and harpsichordist Albert Fuller. The creative associates from SUNY Buffalo presented a concert of avant-garde music here in the chapel, of which one highlight was a composition for piano, so long, so slow, and so quiet that snoring could be heard coming from a member of the audience. For many of us, among the most memorable performances were those of the Paul Kuntz Chamber Orchestra from Paris, accompanied on 2 occasions by trumpeter Adolf Scherbaum and on the 3rd by harpsichordist Nicanor Zabaleta. But 2 performances surely stand out for many. On February the 25th, 1966, 2 young white guys from the city took the stage here in the chapel along with a small backup band. To your left stood Art Garfunkel, to your right, Paul Simon. You should have been here, President Williams. Their recently released single, Sounds of Silence, had been #1 on the Billboard Top 100 for 2 weeks in January. Within a couple of months, the film The Graduate would introduce them to the rest of the world, thanks to Simon's song, Mrs. Robinson. We heard them when they stood on the threshold of fame. On April the 30th of that same year, Chuck Berry brought a band to the hockey rink for Spring House Party weekend. His style was rhythm and blues, and the songs he performed were his standards. But among those in his band was a young guitarist who attracted attention not only for his virtuosity, but also because here and there during his solos he played the guitar with his teeth. Not until our 40th reunion would I learn that that young performer was Jimi Hendrix. It seems fair to say that if we heard Simon and Garfunkel at the point they were becoming Simon and Garfunkel, we heard Jimi Hendrix before he was Jimi Hendrix. As early as spring semester freshman year, the Vietnam War was attracting the attention of students and faculty. The Spectator's issue of March 5th, 1965 included an interview concerning Vietnam with Professors Blackwood, Richardson, Rockwell, Millar, and Kahn. On April the 17th, 4 Hamilton students, including our classmate Ken Casanova, joined approximately 20,000 others in a march in Washington, D.C. to protest the war. During sophomore year, the Bristol Campus Center opened. Now we had clothes washers and dryers on campus. Civilization as we came to know it had arrived. The war continued to be a subject of interest. How could it be otherwise when it was the lead story on all 3 nightly television newscasts? We certainly paid attention when General Lewis Hershey, head of the Selective Service, announced that henceforth student deferments were contingent upon one being in the top 2/3 of one's class while achieving an acceptable score on an as yet to be administered standardized test. A poll conducted in November '65 reported that more than half the student body and nearly half the faculty supported the war. 26% of the faculty reportedly favored the use of nuclear weapons. Early in February 1966, Senator Robert Kennedy spoke to a standing room only audience in the chapel. His remarks were broadcast over WHCL as well. New York Senior Senator Jacob Javits came 2 weeks later, advocating peace talks with the North Vietnamese. In April, the college's president, Robert McEwen, suffered a major heart attack and by September had tendered his resignation. Vice President Richard Cooper took over leadership of the college, and a search committee of faculty and trustees took up the task of finding McEwen's successor. During our junior year, the matter of the draft and the war itself became increasingly prominent. In September 1966, we learned that one student was reclassified 1A, meaning eligible for immediate induction into the military. In the middle of October 1966, Alex Haley, author of the recently published autobiography of Malcolm X, came to speak. Ultimately, of greater significance than Haley's presentation was his meeting our classmate Ibu Manga. Haley was at that point at work on a history of his family. One of his goals was to learn of the origins of at least one of his African ancestors. Manga recognized the few isolated words and phrases in a language unknown to Haley that his family had passed down for generations. There were words in the Manding language, spoken by people residing in what is now the West African nation of Gambia. A visit to Manga's country and meeting with his father and uncles, all Manding oral historians, enabled Haley to reconstruct a plausible account of his ancestors' enslavement and transport to America, a crucial early chapter in his family history, Roots. The televised dramatization of Haley's work in 1976 captured America's attention. It was one of a number of developments in that period that would encourage broader engagement with African American history and culture. Social life on campus continued to be problematic. After Associate Dean Hadley Depew threatened to cancel the 1967 Winter Carnival weekend, the Social Committee undertook a study of the problems he had identified. It concluded that 4 issues were disrupting campus life: academic pressures intensified by uncertainties about one's draft status, easy access to alcohol leading to abuse, scarcity of women impeding social life, and Hamilton's geographical isolation. Its report also expressed hope that the opening of Kirkland College would address at least partially some of the social issues. The war continued to add to a growing unease about life on campus. Ken Casanova and Phil Sayer organized a teach-in about Vietnam in February that included Professors Richardson, Adler, Ring, and Barrick. Concerns about the draft were increasing. Dean Tolles informed The Spectator in March that students shouldn't worry about recent proposals by President Johnson that all of draft age should be tested physically and mentally to determine their fitness to serve. He advised us, quote, to relax and breathe deeply, unquote. Not very helpful. It also did not help that we learned of the departure of younger faculty for other institutions, some among the most interesting academicians on the Hill. One stated that at his new institution he would be better paid, be able to teach a greater variety of courses, and have more time for research. Others would follow. On April the 14th, 1967, it was announced that John Wesley Chandler, Dean of Williams College, would succeed Robert McEwen as Hamilton's president. While that might have constituted a turning point for the college, that announcement also revealed that he would not assume his duties until February the 1st, 1968. Richard Cooper would continue in office. The changes that a new administration seemed to promise were to be deferred for at least 9 months, taking our class into its final semester. The 1967-68 academic year, our senior year, began quietly. The football team, with John Friedman as quarterback and Bill Pomeroy as running back, would have a great season, going 6-1, the best record since 1963. And while I'm on the subject of sports, Bruce Moll, by his senior year, a 3-time All-American swimmer in the NCAA College Division, would have a distinguished season, establishing a new record time for the 400-meter individual medley in the College Division Swimming and Diving Championship, while the swim team was undefeated. The hockey team surprised everybody at the end of its season by upsetting Colby and going to the ECAC Division II playoffs. 3 members of the team, including our own Tom Wheeler, made up the ECAC Division II All-Star team. With Stephen Fuchs as captain, the tennis team was 9-1 overall. Not a word about the draft or the Vietnam War is to be found in the first 5 issues of The Spectator in the fall of 1967, except for the announcement of that a Marine recruiter would be on campus late in September and that representatives of the U.S. Navy would visit early the following month. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary about those visits, though that would change 4 weeks later. It is fair to say that the tumultuous year of 1968 began on the Hill on November the 1st, 1967. On that day, members of the college's SDS chapter tried to prevent a Marine recruiter from coming onto the campus by blocking College Hill Road. They would be forcibly restrained by members of Alpha Delta Phi. Suddenly, the college confronted issues associated with the war, the draft, free speech, and policies announced by the head of the Selective Service to punish anti-war dissent among those of draft age. No longer were we sheltered by Hamilton's seeming remoteness from political and social conflict. That conflict had come to campus. From Williamstown, President Chandler consulted with Richard Cooper and the trustees about what position to take regarding the presence of military recruiters. Activism was better than apathy, he told those attending Parents' Weekend, but all ideas should be welcomed and debated on campus, including voluntary military service. In December, the college chapter of the American Association of University Professors announced its opposition to the presence of military recruiters on campus as long as Louis Hershey's threats to resistors remained in effect. Lest anyone think that either the leaders of the student protest or those of the AAUP chapter were disaffected radicals, I would point out that Ken Casanova and Randolph Splitter, among the founders of the SDS chapter, had been admitted to Phi Beta Kappa in September. Charles Adler, scholar of Russian history, was the president of the AAUP chapter, its secretary, Martin Caravano, who would later lead the college as president. The trustees agreed with Chandler that recruiters would be welcome on campus, but that General Hersey's policy to seek induction of draft resistors must end. In the middle of February, members of the SDS chapter occupied the president's office for several hours. He discussed their complaints while reaffirming the policy of open access for recruiters. Chandler recently told me that one thing he feared was the presence of police on campus, noting that the Oneida County Sheriff had expressed willingness to act should the need arise. On February the 26th, he spoke to students at the weekly Tuesday chapel. Reflecting on Hamilton's troubled environment and prompted by word that some students were contemplating transferring to other colleges, he argued that while the academic grass might seem greener elsewhere, he saw no evidence of that. He did call for reforms to the curriculum and to the academic calendar, which came about the following year. His remarks were a breath of fresh air, suggesting new possibilities for academic life on the Hill. We returned on Sunday, March the 31st from spring break in time to hear Lyndon Johnson tell America he would not seek a second term as president. Just 4 days later, Walter Cronkite did not end his newscast with his usual valedictory, and that's the way it is. Thursday, April the 4th, 1968, this is Walter Cronkite, CBS News, good night. Instead, in the closing seconds of his program, he announced that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. Things were spinning out of control. All this time, we were immersed in the work of completing our programs, including senior theses and comprehensive examinations. Some were receiving orders to report for the selective service physical exam. And then we were done. Sunday, June the 2nd, 1968 was the day of our commencement. As commencement speaker, Daniel Patrick Moynihan called for awareness and flexibility as tactics needed to confront the conflict between the extreme left and the extreme right. He admonished us also to, quote, do a man's work in the world, but cherish a world of your own and give into it on occasion, unquote. In his baccalaureate sermon preached here in the chapel, theologian Robert McAfee Brown wasted no time in confronting us with the necessity of taking risks to confront the challenges of the day, particularly the Vietnam War. Quote, if you cannot fight in it without destroying your conscience and in the process destroying your fellow men, then you will have to take the risk of an educated man of informed conscience and refuse to do so, and that might mean 5 years of your life. An allusion to the maximum prison sentence for refusing induction into the military. I must remind you of Hamilton men whose conscience and sense of duty led them to serve and ultimately to die in the service of the country. Our classmate, Private First Class Whitney T. Ferguson, the 3rd United States Army, was killed in action in Vietnam on March the 11th, 1969, just 9 months after he graduated. Second Lieutenant John Foreman, class of 65, United States Army, and Lance Corporal Kenneth L. Hurst, United States Marine Corps, class of 67, also died in Vietnam. War touched our class again when First Lieutenant Michael Cleary, United States Marine Corps, member of the class of 2003 and son of our classmate Pat Cleary and his wife Mary Ann, was killed by a roadside bomb during Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2005. In honor of those 4 men, and in honor of all the other Hamilton men who died in America's wars, and whose names are listed at the back wall of the chapel, I ask for 1 minute of silence. Thank you. During the year following graduation, I believe we began to take full measure of our educations here. Working with contemporaries who'd gone to other colleges, there were no doubt occasions that revealed we had a combination of skills, knowledge, and experiences that set us apart. There would have been times when we drew upon knowledge acquired on the Hill that we did not recall until the situation required it. Most surely took oral presentations in stride because of our experience in public speaking here. Here we learned to think critically, read critically, and communicate both orally and in writing in a manner that was articulate and therefore persuasive. What we discovered we did not already know was compensated for by having acquired the skill to teach ourselves, the main purpose of a liberal arts education. The college, we know it is gone. The curriculum we know is gone. Its demographic homogeneity, likewise. The college as we know it now continues the tradition of great teaching, thus providing opportunities for great learning. Its faculty is to be admired, its